Just got done editing this interview. You guys are going to love it. Before I do that, though, I want you to know that I'm going to be in the comments for the next 30 minutes or so answering your questions. If there's additional questions you want me to ask the CEO next time I interview them, leave them below. Or if you're just loving the data points I get CEOs to share, click the thumbs up button below. That's your way of telling me you're loving this stuff, and I'll get you more of it. Additionally, again, I'll be in the comments answering any questions you have. All right, for 30 minutes. Enjoy the interview. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Singh. He's the CEO and co-founder of Infer, a company that provides a predictive platform for helping businesses win more customers. Infer was recently acquired by Ignite. Prior to that, he was an entrepreneur in residence at Sutter Hill Ventures. And before that, he helped create and architect Yahoo Boss, an open search platform that runs over 1 billion queries per month. All right, Vic, you ready to take us to the top?
Let's do it.
All right. So you reached out to me recently with a unique email. What did the email say?
Yeah, so I reached out. I'm a big fan of your blog and been following your podcast for quite some time. And I think naturally most SaaS founders stumble upon your content since you're capturing some pretty unique metrics about some really interesting private companies that would be hard to get access to.
So what Infer sell for?
Elsewhere. And so I've kind of written articles in the past for TechCrunch and whatnot around various SaaS metrics. And after getting acquired, I've been kind of surveying the enterprise landscape, and it's tricky to do that when a lot of the companies that you're looking at are privately held, and just there isn't data about these companies and how they're performing, and the revenue numbers you see online vary depending on different sources. It's unreliable or stale, so you kind of need a more consistent metric to be able to assess the value and the performance of a company. And so I was playing with LinkedIn and came up with a couple of searches that could help kind of determine if a company's healthy or not, based on essentially looking at the number of salespeople they have, the number of salespeople they had or people they've lost, and then looking at the number of years the company's been in business. And by taking those three metrics, which are available on LinkedIn and available using Google Search, you can compute these metrics that seem to directionally be correct about how the company's performing and how healthy their sales team is, which is usually correlated to revenue and growth. And the nice thing about this is that you can compute it for any company. And so then you can start to compare companies and see which companies are performing better in certain markets and whatnot, which I've found to be very interesting. And so I decided to write it up, and you're kind enough to post it on your site, and it seems like it was pretty well received, and hopefully a lot of people find value from it.
Yeah, so let's dive deeper, right? So Intercom, you computed that they have a 5.3% sales team churn, STC. Describe what that actually means. What's the math behind 5.3%?
Right. So the way STC is computed, sales team churn, is you do a search on LinkedIn to determine how many sales reps the company has lost. And I detail that in the blog post. So you take that number, and that's your numerator, and then you determine how many years the company's been in business. So you just simply do a search on the company and find their incorporation date. And you take their incorporated year and subtract it by the current year, and that'll give you the number of years the company's been in business.
Mm-hmm. So
and you divide those two numbers.
I was going to say, let's do an example real quick. So Intercom past reps you have listed as 31. Does that mean that's how many have churned? They had Intercom in their job description and now they don't?
Right.
And currently the current number is 70. So you do 70 minus 31?
Well, what I do is I take I want to compute churn per year. So I will take the total churn number, which I think was 31, you mentioned, and then take the number of years the company's been in business.
3.7.
Right. And then divide those. And then that gives me a churn per year value. So that's how many heads they're churning every year on average. And then I take that number and I divide that by the current sales team that they have. And that gives me a percentage value, which will indicate like how much of their team will churn in 1 year's time. And that's what I'm using to kind of determine the health of the company and to compare companies.
So again, just to run this math on, because I want everyone listening to be able to compute this as well, to compare their own metrics to this new metric. Intercom had 31 reps they've lost. They've been in business for 3.7 years. You're doing 31 divided, or sorry, it's 3.7% churn per year. You're doing that by taking the 31 churned reps divided by 3,052 days in business, essentially, right? They launched in 2011, and that's where you're getting 3.7%, correct?
Yeah, let me pull up my notes here so I can make sure it's accurate. So 31 past reps.
Yep.
So these are reps that are no longer with the company. They have 70 current reps that are with the company. They've been in business for about 3,078 days. And the first, I compute the churn per year. And the churn per year is taking the past reps, which is 31, and then dividing that by the number of years the company's been in business. So I'm taking that 3,078 days and essentially dividing it by 365, which will give me the number of years. That's the denominator. And that'll result in 3.7%, or 3.7 sales heads they'll lose per year. And I take that number and I divide that by the current sales team. So 3.7 divided by 70, and that's giving me the 5.25%, which is the percentage of the team that will churn in 1 year.
Yeah. So I'm going to be devil's advocate. Vic, this is a great number, but they churn more sales reps in later years. Like, you're just taking an average over the full time they've been in business, but that churn number changes over time. This metric doesn't work because of that.
So a few things there. One, that is true. But the nice thing is, so there's some caveats, right? So that is one caveat. And it's hard to get around because LinkedIn doesn't enable us to search for past heads in like the last 3 months or the last 6 months or 12 months. And so if it enabled that, then it would be possible per year across the entire lifetime of the company. So, but a few things is when you do this across companies and you're doing it the same way, it tends, like the comparisons tend to be pretty accurate because you're treating every company the same way. And as long as you're comparing it with companies that have been roughly in business for around the same amount of time, so the same kind of, like companies that are like, Series C or been around for like 5 years, 10 years, if they're in that kind of bucket, this comparison tends to be pretty accurate. And I care more about the relative comparisons here because what is health? Like, it could have been 10%, it could have been 100%. We don't know what that means unless you compare it to another company. And so as long as it's benchmarkable, I find it to be pretty useful. And this tends to follow that principle. Looking at the spreadsheet of all the companies I computed this for, it seems to be pretty directionally correct, especially since I've asked some of the founders of some of those companies what they thought, and they thought it was pretty accurate. But then there's a couple ways to get around it to match up to more recent churn. There's two ways. One is you could just take away the number of years in that calculation. So let's say like the company's been around for 10 years, but let's say for the first 3 years, it didn't sell anything. So it doesn't really make sense to include those 3 years in the calculation. So you would just divide it by 7 years as opposed to 10 years. And when you start doing those things, then the number tends to be pretty accurate if you compare it to the company's internal number on how much they've churned in the last year. You could just remove the number of years to reflect how much they've actually, when sales churn really mattered.
Yeah, but there is no, the trick there is there is no public information where you could do that for every company. You have to like email every CEO and say, when did you actually start selling?
Yes. So there's another way to do this that's actually even better.
Can you look at the first hire on LinkedIn, the first like account manager hire relative to the start date?
You could, but you would have to do that manually for each company. You'd have to search each company, find that rep, find the first date, and then use that. And that just makes it a little bit more troublesome to compute the metric fast. And people tend to just gravitate towards metrics that are easily computable. So that's kind of why I did it this way. There's another way to do this. And I was actually having this conversation around the same question with Tomash. And he was asking this. It's like, hey, I was talking to some VPs of sales, and they were saying that our churn is 10 to 20% every year. And you're saying in your table, you should be aiming for 5% or less. That's a huge gap. What's going on? And so the 5% number is because it's overall time. And so it's actually accurate if you look at overall time over many years. But if you look at the most recent year, it's true. Sales teams will typically target even 10 to 20% churn. They want to remove their bottom performers. They want to keep raising the bar up. to make targets harder to hit.
At what scale though? How old are companies that are doing that target, or what is their revenue already above?
I think it varies because it's more, I think, around like product market fit. Like if they have product market fit, and they can start throwing sales reps at the problem, even if they're at 1 million ARR, if they're going from 1 million to 4 million, they could probably be pretty aggressive even at that stage. It becomes even easier when you start going 4 to 16, like those kind of the Marketo growth trajectory, where you're basically doubling and tripling your sales team every year. You probably want to be targeting higher churn because you're in the early years and you care more about the revenue growth at that stage as opposed to efficiency. And so you're willing to throw more sales as the problem. Later on, you care about efficiency. You probably don't want 25, 30% sales churn because that's just like really gross. You probably want to have a more consistent sales model that's a little bit more principled in economics. But the early stages or the middle stages, you're probably looking at 20% and it's coming down to 10%. And eventually it gets to like even sub 5%, 2% like we see with Salesforce or Microsoft. Those numbers are probably below 5%, below 10%, 5%. So the 10, 20% benchmark is hard to compute unless, and as a trick, you basically compute these values I mentioned, and you do it every month. So you go on LinkedIn, let's say you pick your favorite companies, and every month you compute these numbers, and you save it. So now you're essentially snapshotting these values. And now you can just take the differences. You're basically computing the slope. So for example, let's say 3 months ago, you lost, let's say your sales team was 20 people. And you lost, or actually, let's say you had 10 people. And then 3 months later, you had 15 people. So you grew your sales team by 5 people. But you also lost in that time frame like 8 people. So you lost 8 people in 3 months. And so you can just take that and multiply it by 4, and that means you're going to lose 32 people in a year. And now replace that in the SCC calculation, and it actually ends up being closer to 10 to 20%. So this was the data I gave to Tomash, but basically you snapshot it, and then
Vic, but hold on. So devil's advocate here. I would imagine most salesperson firings happen in Q4 when the year closed out and you missed quota, or Q1 because they were lazy and didn't get it done before the holiday and didn't want to fire someone before Christmas.
Yes.
So extrapolating the data can be dangerous, correct?
It is. So ideally, you don't do this over just 1 quarter. So you could do it over, like, if you're doing it every month, then compute the difference over like 3 quarters. Look at it over that time frame. And I think it will eventually, it should line up, because when people look at their annual attrition rate, right, they might have had a crazy year, a bumpy year, but they're still looking at their annual attrition rate, or at least they should be. And the LinkedIn data, if you're saving it every month, you would be able to line it up. It should line up to your internal number pretty closely, unless those sales reps aren't publicizing that information. But that's usually not the case, because sales reps are like the first ones to like publicize they're at a new company and they're trying to sell business. So yeah,
I think so this is very interesting to me. So I just want to run through this one more time, the math with you guys, so you can run this yourself. If a lot of you are driving or you're at the gym, and you just try and remember this, right? So for Intercom on LinkedIn, past reps, right? Meaning they had account manager in the title, they don't anymore. There's 31 of them. Vic is then taking the 31 and dividing by 8.4 years that Intercom has been in business, which means on average 3.7 salespeople or account managers churned every year. He's then taking that 3.7 and dividing it into how many current reps on LinkedIn say Intercom amount manager, right, which is 70. So 3.7 divided by 70 is 5.3% salesperson churn. And that's where he's getting his 5.3% number. Vic, let's dive into some other stuff here, right? So Drift, with that same math, is at over 10%. Does that mean Intercom is more valuable than Drift?
Not necessarily. So if you look at in that table that's in the post, column J, there's this trend graph I provide, which is looking at the STC, the sales team churn, and looking at that at different time points.
You're talking about the STC over the last 3 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so essentially what I mentioned before with like trying to make the number very accurate, I was collecting this information every month. I wasn't just doing this one time. I've been collecting every month. And so this shows kind of a plot of that. And what you'll notice is that for Intercom, even though their SCC value is low to 5.25%, you'll see that over the last 3 months it's climbing, that their value is actually increasing. But if you look at Drift, it's consistently going down. And so they're bringing their churn down every month for the last 3 months. And so it's hard to say, right? Because if sales teams are targeting 10 to 20% churn, and we think that's a good thing, Drift's in that bucket, but they're also going down every month with their churn. So I think the looking at the differences of how this value is changing, to me, is almost just as important or more important than what the STC value is at any point in time.
Yeah.
I think you really want to look at how it's changing. And so even if your STC value is like 10% or whether it's 5% or 2%, I would be more concerned about it changing in an upward direction. You want it to be stable, right? Sales teams want stable numbers as much as possible. So if you're targeting 10% churn, you want to have 10% consistently, right? Or around that. And so when you start seeing variance and changes in the STC value that's too high, that's where I get scared, whether it's high or low, because you might have a good reason for it to be high. So it doesn't mean that Drift is performing worse than Intercom. It could be the case that they're targeting they're targeting a higher set of churn, a higher churn number than Intercom, and they're actually doing a good job of bringing it down, and they're getting their economics and their reproducibility of their sales team in a much better state. And actually, Intercom is actually going up. Maybe they were, maybe not as. It's hard to say. There could be a lot of conflating factors around it.
I'm just studying the data. This is by no means right or wrong. I'm just recognizing patterns, right? What's interesting to hear when I look at pre-IPO companies that you've done this for. So I think Snowflake and GitLab will both IPO in 2020. Both of them over the past 3 months have decreased sales team churn by 16 and 19% respectively, right? On average. So like that's interesting to me because they might be optimizing for something like the rule of 40. Right, where they've got to take their cash burn plus their growth and get above 40. So they're optimizing there. There are other companies that are smaller, right, that are scaling where you're actually seeing this number like go up. So for example, Gainsight with 26 reps right now, right? They're at 12.7% sales team churn, but that has increased almost 37% over the last 3 months. That's a signal to me, like the way I read into that is, okay, wow, Gainsight's hiring a bunch of sales reps trying to figure out how the model works and will it scale. And the second I see that start trending back down, I go, oh, they figured it out. They're going to get really valuable here shortly.
Right. I think there's a couple of interesting trends I see as well. And like you look at companies like Gainsight or even Zora, who have higher STC values, like above 12%. Those companies also have a different, like more enterprisey model to deployment. It takes more time to get up and running. So it's versus like some of these companies, like you look at Zoom and others, which have a much more almost like self-service approach to the product, Slack, others, and their numbers are just astronomically low in terms of SEC. And so I think that also plays a contributing factor is how heavy it is to deploy your product. If you have a heavier to deploy product, your sales team the caliber of your sales team has to be much higher. It's a much more enterprise-oriented sales model. And finding those people and training those people, losing those people, and then rehiring those people is much harder than it is to sell a product that's almost self-service. And so I think that also plays a factor in this.
Yeah. So like my mind, when I'm looking at this data, what I want to do is I have way back machine data on the pricing pages of all this company. So I can plot their pricing changes over time and understand when they introduced enterprise or if they're freemium low touch or like a HubSpot model or Hootsuite, plot that against sales team churn. And then we should be able to actually back into what the like prime target sales team churn is relative to how old your company is based off time, the average ACV, right? And your total ARR, right? And relative, whether you're pre-IPO or just crossing $1 million in ARR. And I think those as benchmarks are really interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think the more data you have that you can correlate and use with this value, the better. Because I think one thing that I want to do with this data is like actually compare it to ARR, compare it to differences in ARR. And then it starts to, if it's true, and I think it is, that the SEC value and how it's changing has some correlation to these other key revenue metrics in the company, then the SEC has more validation to actually use this metric because you can compute it for any company. You can't really compute revenue easily for any company. So then people have more trust in it, and they actually might use this to assess their business relative to the competitors. VCs might use this to assess a bunch of different companies in different markets. It becomes a very much more valuable metric.
Do you think STC will more directly correlate to average price point or stage of revenue of the company?
It's hard to say. I would probably say, like, if you look at all these values that are lower, they're definitely for companies that are much bigger, older kind of companies like Salesforce, Microsoft. They have much lower metrics. But you also have companies who sell low price point companies like products that are very early in their business, and they're really low too. And then you have everyone else who has really high values, and it's because, it could be because, their business is just harder to scale. It's a heavier product to scale. And so there might be a few factors that it correlates to versus just one. So it'll be interesting to see, that data kind of cross-reference with some of the metrics that you're collecting, and to actually see what the correlations are. But I think it probably will be in those three buckets. I don't know which one will be the strongest factor.
Yeah. Well, I'm down to throw some of my data mining resources at this. You've invented the metric, so I'd love to put more stuff behind it, try and find some correlations. So I hope we should work together and make that happen. We'll keep publishing it and sticking it out there.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right. Hey, before we wrap up, what are you doing next? You sell Infer. You're not on a jet, so it wasn't like FU money. I assume it was good money, but what are you doing next?
Yeah, we're on it. We're working on it. You saw I said stealth. It's more of an excuse that we're still figuring things out versus actually trying to be stealthy.
Let me ask a couple questions. Answer what you can. B2C or B2B, your next venture?
B2B.
Okay.
But I think there's more inspiration from B2C, like trying to do more bottoms up kind of approach versus trying to make it more heavier top down.
Got it. So you're looking at companies like Expensify that went bottoms up, Zoom that went bottoms up, Twilio.
Yeah, more lighter weight products. I think people just need easier to use products, and I think people will want more product driven growth models. I think those are doing very well, and I think there's a lot of interesting markets out there within the enterprise that are worth disrupting. I like these ones that are kind of like old and boring markets that have very very nasty technical, they require Deloitte to get involved, and you got to get consultants involved. To me, it's always those solutions are the ones that should be primed for disruption. They should be simpler. They should be easier. Decomplexify it. Make it available for the masses, because there's value there. So there's a few of those that are left that I see that are interesting.
And who do you think you build for? Or asked differently, once you're live, who do you think you're going to be selling to? Developers, marketers, somebody else?
I like the functional sell, selling into the business users. I think this time around, I'm kind of more interested in a more horizontal sale. At Infer, we were very hyper focused on sales and marketing people. So we were selling to VP of sales, VP of marketing, all day. And I like these kind of you look at BI tools, they sell into pretty much any function. They can sell into sales ops, they can sell into HR ops, they can sell, to engineers, they can sell everywhere. It's a very horizontal play, and they add value in a lot of different places. And so I think a more horizontal approach would be nice and just touch a lot of different use cases, but be a very simple platform. Don't try to do too much either. Let the user kind of create the creativity around it.
Yep. And sorry, when was Infer acquired?
We were acquired end of 2017, and then we stuck around and helped the acquiring company out in 2018. And
and this was ESW, right? So it's private equity.
Yes.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, good. Let's wrap up here quickly with Famous Five. Number one, favorite business book.
Ooh, pretty much anything written by Warren Buffett or about Warren Buffett. Snowball. I mean, everything. I just I find him very inspiring, even though he's not an engineering entrepreneur. His words of wisdom and his focus is pretty inspiring.
Number two, is there a CEO you're following or studying?
Broke up.
Vic, is there a CEO you're following or studying?
I try to look at CEOs of companies of products that I like to use. And, obviously, Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella have done amazing things, taking over their companies. And, I use those products all the time. They take over all my tabs or my operating system. And so I definitely have a lot of respect for that they've been able to keep those products long lasting for me. And then I've also kind of more in the enterprise space, you look at what Anaplan has done, what Frank Calderoni did when he kind of took over, has been pretty amazing to watch as well. They're growing like a mid-market company, 40-50% year over year at 250 million. And, I think it's a very interesting market as well.
Yeah. It helps when you've got $300 million in funding.
Yes.
Yeah. I forget if that was pre-IPO or post-IPO, the 300, but a lot of money behind them.
That's true.
All right. And number 3, what's your favorite online tool for building whatever it is you're building next?
Online tool. I mean, as an engineer, we tend to build a lot of stuff kind of internally, home grow a lot of things. We've at Infer, we built a lot on Python, and there's obviously lots of libraries around that, and a lot of AI libraries are available for that. And so probably something with Python in the back end or in the front end side, like we are not less on the front, more on the back end side, which we find pretty fun to develop with.
All right, number 4, how many hours of sleep you get every night?
Not enough. But that's more at this stage, more because of our kids. We have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who's keeping us busy, and our 2-year-old isn't quite fully sleeping through the night. So probably, I don't know, like 5-6 hours, but
okay.
If I get lucky, maybe 7.
That's the real reason you haven't launched something yet, is right when you sold Infer, you were just having your current 2-year-old. So you were being a dad for 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, the sleep at the end of the Infer stage was far worse. That was pretty, like when you're going through the acquisition and then you have a kid on the way, it's all the different people you have to talk to. You're thinking about the company all day and night. And so I think it's amazing how even when we got acquired, we're doing almost the same amount of work as we were before. But just that lifting of the shoulders of accountability and having a big company get involved to help kind of take care of it, the sleep at night is just so much better.
Yeah. I believe it. All right. And how old are you today?
35.
Okay. Last question.
For when I was 25.
Yeah. Take us back. What do you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
Oh gosh. I think when you're building a company when you're like 20 something, you tend to over optimize, I think, on too many things that are not important. And then you have kids, and you learn that your time is really valuable, and you really have to pick your battles and not focus too much. And it's okay to make decisions that are not optimal and overthink things. And so I think just going back and telling myself don't over optimize stuff, it would have been helpful on everything.
Guys, there you have it. Singh founded Infer in 2010, sold it in 2017. Since then, has been working on a new company, but in the meantime, came up with this new metric, sales team churn, which takes into account reps that a company has lost over their lifetime relative to their current reps, and calculates how many they've churned. Not sure if it's if there should be correlations there to average sale price and sales team churn, or the stage of the company, 10 million AR versus $100 million in AR. But regardless, interesting leading indicator. And what makes it even more interesting is it's simple to calculate and the data is public. So if it is an indicator, it becomes very valuable. Singh, thanks for taking us to the top.
Yeah, thank you.
These CEOs rarely give these kinds of interviews. I hit them hard, I get the data, and I want to do it more. So if you want to get more of this stuff, make sure you subscribe up here. And then additionally, go check out one of my other CEO interviews right now.